Reverse Grunfeld defense. As we know that Grunfeld is one of the most popular opening played with the black pieces. Many top grandmasters played it many times, call it one of the most strong and stable opening. It contains a large amount of theory. For all those who don't know what is Grunfeld defense, let's check it out. In the Grunfeld, black plays the Grunfeld basically. White starts out the game with 1d4, black plays knight f6, c4, g6, knight c3, d5. The point is, we do not play bishop g7, we first play d5. And after takes, white played e4. White is having a strong center. And after knight into c3, b into c3, bishop g7, we have the Grunfeld defense on the board. And this opening is played from the black pieces. But this opening is actually very interesting because first of all, white is having a very strong center, but on the other hand, black tries to create weakness on the center. Like for example, after knight f3, black plays c5, putting pressure on the pawn on d4, which gives a very idle opening, which gives very idle options to black, which is also a very good option from playing with the black pieces. So this is what happens in the Grunfeld defense. But today we are going to check it out. Playing the reverse Grunfeld. Basically, we are playing the Grunfeld from the white pieces, which is actually makes a large amount of difference because we know that every single move matters in the chess. So this is a very great example. From white side, my friend Qh4, which I named it as a one-shot subscriber, is playing with the white pieces, and we have a random grandmaster because black also played very well with the black pieces. So let's check it out. So white starts out the game with a knight f3 and black responds with d5. Many times, the 99% of the times you play knight f3, your opponent first will think that I can't play e5 because my pawn is hanging, so let's play d5, take control of the center. You play g3, black plays c5. 90% of the times your opponent is going for this setup. Bg2, knight c6, and now you are going to play d4. Which happened in the game? cd4, knight d4, and now we have e5. You see the same setup. Knight c3, knight c6, and bc6. And here comes a very big difference. If black would have played the Grunfeld defense, then after bishop g7, it's a white to play. You see, it's white to play because here black played bishop g7. But actually, when white played this Grunfeld system, then after bc6, you see that white is already having the bishop on g2 and it's still white to play. You see, one move makes a large amount of difference. Because of this, it gives a very decent advantage to white. So this is the basic purpose of making this video. You can also go and play this reverse Grunfeld defense. After bc6, the game is going to be very interesting. White first played c4. Triple attack on the pawn on d5 with the pawn, with the bishop, and with the queen. Only two defender. So black defends it by playing bishop e6. And here comes queen to a4. A very decent move from the white side. Hitting the pawn on c6. And on the next move, the idea is to capture the pawn. And there can be some ideas of capturing the pawn on d5 with the pawn. So black is forced to play queen d7, removing this pawn from the pin and also protecting this pawn. Knight to c3. And after knight c3, white idea is to capture the pawn on d5. And here you cannot capture or push the pawn because the pawn on c6 is simply hanging and you lose the queen. And if you make a random move like f6 trying to defend the pawn on e5, I can simply take, pawn take, queen take, king take, and after knight into pawn, I'm simply a pawn up. Or you can say white is simply a pawn up. So black played knight e7, defending the pawn on c6 as well as the pawn on d5. You can also go for playing knight f6, but knight e7 is slightly much more accurate because you protect both the pawns, and at any time you can play f6 protecting the e5 pawn as well. cd5, cd5, and in this position white played a very interesting move. White played knight to b5. This was a very interesting move. Knight b5. The idea of playing knight b5 is white wants to play knight to d6 or perhaps knight c7. The idea is to play knight c7 basically, hitting the king and the rook. You cannot capture the knight because the queen is simply pinned. We are going to discuss it. But after cd5, many players are going to trade the queens. You can also go for trading the queens. If you trade the queens, the game would be continued after castle. And now it's like a double-edged sword game because at the first hand, black is having a very nice center. But on the other hand, white is going to make the center the weaknesses by putting pressure on the center pawns. And as we know that white bishop is extremely powerful, white king is much safer than the black king. So like a rook d8, you cannot push because the rook is hanging with the bishop. So you have to play rook d8, defending the pawn. Here white can play rook d1. And here there are two moves. Black can play king e8, defending the pawn, or black can even go for playing a d4. If black tries to play d4, we can play f4. f6, defending the pawn, pawn takes, and now we can play e3. Knight to c4, knight to f5, you cannot capture the knight or the pawn because the pawn is pinned. Knight f5, pawn takes, you have to capture the pawn with the knight. If you try to capture the pawn with the pawn, g4. You have to move the knight and I can capture the pawn on d4 and white is completely winning. So you have to capture the pawn with the knight. And here comes bishop f4, a very excellent move. The idea is to basically remove this knight defender, remove the pawn on e5. So bishop f4 hits the pawn, you have to capture it, and after takes, king moves, rook takes pawn, white is still a pawn up. So this is what happens if black tries to play d4. If black tries to play king to e8, we can play knight to b5. And here, white is already putting some dark squares weaknesses. After rook d7, white can play bishop d2 and rook c1, bishop a5. And I think white is having a very decent advantage as white is completely leading in development. Black pieces are already very passive, although black is having a very nice center. This is the main point of chess. You have weaknesses, you have the strength. So this is the whole variation of queen into d7. So, but knight b5 was played, which was actually a very interesting move. My friend actually prepared it. This was his preparation. After knight b5, the only move from the black side is to play knight to c6. The idea here is white can no longer play knight c7 check as the queen can simply grab it, as the knight is in between from giving a check to the black king. So after knight c6, although the game was not played knight c6, in the game black played rook to b8, which was a bad move. If knight c6 would have been played in the game, then we would have simply saw castle, bishop e7, rook d1, and here there are two moves. Black can play rook to c8 or black can castle. Castle looks one of the most natural moves, making the king safe. But here we can play knight c3. Triple attack on the pawn on d5. You cannot push as the knight is hanging on c6 simply with the queen and with the bishop. So black have to play rook d8 and after knight takes. If bishop takes, then it's simply winning after rook d5. So black have to play knight d4. Now the knight is hanging. So we have a queen trade first. Knight takes bishop, rook takes bishop e3. We do not play something like e3 because knight c2 is already very strong, hitting the rook. But we play bishop e3, giving up the pawn on e2. King f1, knight goes back, takes, rook takes, and white is up simply a pawn up. This is the move. And after bishop e7, rook d1, if black tries to play rook to c8 at the place of castle, we can play now bishop into d5. After bd5, knight c3. Now it's a double attack on the bishop. You cannot protect it. So the best move is to play knight d4. Queen trade, knight takes pawn, king g2. Knight goes to d4. We play bishop e3. Bishop to c5, protecting the knight. And now we're going to play b4, hitting the bishop. King to e6, a very excellent move. After king e6, black hits the knight. So we are going to play knight to f4 check, ef4, bishop takes knight, bishop takes pawn, rook b1 hitting the bishop, bishop moves, bishop into a7, And after pawn takes, it's an equal position. Such a large variation, but it's an equal position in the end. This is what happens if black tries to play rook c8, a very deep and very long variation. So this is the whole variation if black tries to play knight c6. But in the game, we have rook b8, and now we have knight c7 check. You can't go for playing knight d6 check because now it's losing for white. Black is going to play king d8. I'm simply hitting the knight. So you have to queen trade, and now you simply lose the knight because the knight is trapped. The game is over. That is why knight d6 is a blunder. So in the game, white played knight c7 check, which is excellent move. You have to move the king. You cannot capture the knight as the queen is pinned. King d8, knight into e6 check, fe6. And now can you find the best move from the white side? It's a completely positional move. It's actually very hard to find. If you are a good position player, you will definitely find it. So try to give it a try. Okay, so I think you must have had a great deep thought and you must have come up with a move. Excellent move. I personally like this move a lot. Queen h4. Wow. The idea of playing queen h4 is, first of all, as we know that black can no longer castle, black king is still in the center, and whenever your opponent king is weak, try to keep the queens on the board. And not only that, after playing queen h4, there are a lot more ideas. After queen h4, first of all, you cannot move the knight as the king is pinned. If you cannot move the knight, you cannot move the bishop. And if you cannot move the bishop, you cannot move the rook. So basically, now black cannot move his 3 pieces because of the king. So you can say that white is simply taking advantage of the position, complete advantage. And after queen h4, can you try to find the best move from the black side? Sorry, king c8. Very difficult to find. The idea here is basically now black can move the knight, but king c8 looks such a bad move because you are simply putting your king in the open file. White can at any time move the bishop, give a check, and there could be a big problems for black. But actually king c8 works because if the game continues like castle, black can play knight f5, hitting the queen. This is the basic point. Black gets so many tempos you can't imagine. There is no move on the 4th rank. You can't move the queen here, can't here, not here. You can move the queen over these 2 squares. If you try to play queen g4, I can play h5, queen move, e4, queen check, queen c7, and it's completely safe for black. Safe, completely safe. And if after castle knight f5, if you try to play queen g5, I can play bishop e7, hitting the queen goes back, e4, and it's still completely fine for black. This is the basic idea. But king c8 is extremely hard to find. Queen b5 was played in the game. Bishop h3. White is simply giving no time to black, hitting the pawn on e6. You can't go for having a queen trade because black idea was to make a queen trade, but you can't because here I can simply make a queen trade and I can, sorry, wrong move. Bishop into pawn, and white is simply having a 2-point advantage. Like engine says it's +2 and you are simply a pawn up. So king d7, a forced move. Queen h5, hitting this pawn. Queen b4 check. And in this position, in the game we have king f1, but the best move was to play bishop d2. The idea was if black tries to capture the pawn, you can play rook d1, and on the next move you are going to castle. Your opponent king is in the center. You can play f4 e4 at any time and blast away the center, and you can even play queen f7, putting pressure on the pawn on e6. So this would have been a simply phenomenal game, but white thought to preserve the pawn on b2, so he moved the king on f1. Definitely the king looks safe on f1, but now there is only single move for black to keep the position equal, or else every single move is completely losing for black. Can you find the move? Okay, so if you found this incredible move, queen e4, congratulations. You hit the rook, you also protect the pawn. If you play anything, like knight c6, defending this pawn because the queen was attacking the pawn. But now comes queen f7 check. You hit the queen, you hit the king, queen comes in between, and now comes bishop into e6 check. You can't capture the bishop because the queen's pinned. You have to move the king, and after takes, you have to take with the knight, or else you lose the pawn if you take with the bishop. After knight takes, king g2, it's winning for, completely better for white. Queen e4, this move was founded by black. Extremely tough. f3, queen to d4, queen f7, hitting the pawn, check, king of f2. Black captured the rook. So basically, black is simply a rook plus. But can you evaluate the position? In the game, it was simply, you can say it was a rapid game. After queen into h1, it looks completely complicated game. Perhaps white can checkmate black. But what happens if white attack failed and black is simply a rook up? In the game, we have queen into e6 check, king to e8. If you try to move the king over to c7, now it's winning for white by simply playing queen d7 check. And you have to move the king to the dark square, and I can simply play bishop e3 check, pawn push, and I can simply takes, rook into h1, and I win the queen. So black was forced to play king e8, and here we have a check, king move, and here white can simply make a draw because black is having no move. After king f7, white played bishop e6 check, which is also fine. King to g6. If you try to play king f6, I can play bishop g5 check, sacrifice the bishop, and I'll win the queen on h1, and it's winning for white. So king g6, and now comes fantastic move, bishop f5 check. You can't capture the bishop because here comes check. You move the king, takes, push, and it's checkmate for black. Such a high game, such a professional game played by white and as well as black. King f7, you can say black is like, okay, I'm fine with a draw, no problem. But white played bishop e3. Again, sacrificing rook or the pawn. In the game, we have queen into h2 check. If black goes for capturing the rook, it's still a draw. White can simply repeat the position with like bishop e6 check. The king will move, bishop h3, and there is white is threatening a mate. So king goes, bishop check, and here black have to make a draw. But in the game, we have queen into h2 check. Not going for any risk by capturing the rook. King f1, check, bishop g1. If white would have wanted, he can simply make a draw by playing king f2 and repeating the position. But white was like, okay, I'm going to win the game. He's one short subscriber after all. He's going to for a win. But actually, bishop g1 turned out to be the blender. The bar simply goes down in the favor of black. The reason is black is going to play queen h6. And it actually defends everything. When the bishop was on e3, it was defending the square of h6. But after queen h6, black is simply a rook plus now. Because no attack is going to come on e6 because the queen is simply covering it. And now it's a matter of time. Bishop into a7, capturing the pawn, rook into b2, bishop c5, and after queen c6, on the move number 29, white decided to resign the game. But a fantastic game, played by both the players, white and black. There is no play in this position. The bishop is hanging on the queen. White is forced to trade the queen. And after bishop trade, black is simply a rook plus. Extremely strong game played by both the players. Can you even guess the rating of both the players? My friend playing with the white pieces was having an only rating of 1200, you can say 1239, and black was having the rating of 1700. But the class of game is like a GM. The game was extremely strong. White actually gives so much sacrifices, and you see the advantage of playing the reverse Grunfeld defenses, you get an extra tempo. And if black doesn't know how to react to it, you are simply going to win the game. So the basic point of making this video is to show you that if you try to play reverse Grunfeld defense, it is actually one of the most interesting opening you can go for playing it. The game was very interesting. Knight 7 takes checks. Knight b5 was actually a very interesting move. Knight c7. And here, white simply outplayed black in the start. But okay. But if white would have found bishop d2, I think the game would have been simply shifted in the white favor. Because after queen b2, rook d1, there is no play for the black. White is into castle. Going to blast with queen c7. Hitting the pawn on e6. Perhaps e4, f4 can come at any time it's winning. But king f1, queen e4, and black actually found the only move, queen e4, which equalizes the game. f3, queen d4, queen comes, check, takes. If white would have wanted, he can simply make a draw. But he wanted a win, because he is one-shot subscriber. He went for a win, bishop g1, which was turned out to be the blunder. Queen f, king f2, and he should have made a draw. But he played for a win, which turned out to be a bad idea. And he loses the game after playing queen c6. But a fantastic game. A round of applause to both the players. If you like this analysis of the game, but the basic idea was to show you that you can also go for playing this opening. A very interesting opening, the reverse queen Grunfeld defense from the white side. Because the basic idea here is you get an extra tempo because you are right. So must try in your online games, or you can say on the board, over the board tournaments. And yeah, if you learned something new, then make sure to like the video. If you're new to my channel, then make sure to subscribe the channel, because I'm going to come up with these interesting videos like this. And make sure to click the notification bell, because whenever I would be posting new videos, you are going to get notified. And I also post many deadly traps. You can go and check it out. So till then, stay tuned and keep watching One Shot Chess.